So we are going into, I'm closing week 3 because we finished September 1st to the 7th, and we're moving to September 8th through the 14th. I'm going to do this overview video, and then I'm going to come back and look at the assignments. So let's kind of see that we're moving. What I want you to see is that we're moving away from this correlation, right? So we've talked about descriptive research, and you did an observation, and we looked at some case studies, and last week you made your own correlation. And this week we're really going to focus on experiments, and we're going to also focus on what makes an experiment ethical and allowed to do or not. So let's just first, we're going to review a little bit, quiz ourselves on correlation here in this video. We're not going to really, you could make up some data, but I don't think we'll have time to do that. We're going to look at the features of a true experiment and make sure you understand the assignments for this week. So remember that correlation, right, that two things are related to each other, doesn't necessarily mean one thing causes another. So if we look at here, we have length of a marriage is positively correlates with hair loss in men. Does this mean that marriage causes men to lose their hair? Or that balding men make better husbands, right? Well, we don't know any of that. All we simply know is that the length of a marriage, which might be here on the x-axis, has a correlation with men losing hair. So the longer men are married, the more hair they lose. That's all we know. We do not know anything about causation. So remember that correlation is just about prediction, right? So we're just simply saying that there's a relationship between the two variables. Ex post facto means that we're usually measuring after the fact. So something is done, right? In that men, we can measure how long they've been married and how much hair they've lost, but that's all done with no manipulation of any sort of variable, right? We're not assigning men to be married or not be married, right? That would be manipulation, and we're not doing that. Remember, we can have a perfectly positive correlation if as one variable goes up, the other goes up in a perfect straight line, and we'd see a correlation of +1. We can't get better than +1. And no relationship is R is 0, means we can't get any, we can't go down, right? We'd have 0. Down in terms of negative is not necessarily, it's just simply showing that as one variable goes up, R goes up, right? Or the x-axis, the independent variable goes up, the dependent variable goes down. That's all negative means. So we need to remember that correlations can only go between 1 and -1, with a 0 being no relationship at all. So you can kind of test yourself here, right? What are we seeing here? Oh, I even kept in the answers, right? More college students sleep, the better their performance. Positive correlation. More teen girls spend absorbed on social media, the more at risk they are. Positive. So the longer children were breastfed, the greater, more positive. The more leafy vegetables adult eats, the less their mental health declines. Should be a negative, right? One goes up, the other goes down. And if we had a correlational coefficient, so that's R, correlational coefficient, just another word to say R, that is showing us a negative relationship, right? Pretty strong, right? The closer we get to -1, the closer to perfect it is. All right, another one just to kind of make sure we get these illusory correlations again one last time. Murder rate goes up as number of ice creams are sold, right? It doesn't mean that the murder rate is, or the ice cream sold is causing murder rate, or murder rate is causing ice cream to be sold. Probably the illusory correlation is because heat is the factor, right? The hotter it is, the more ice creams are sold, and the hotter it is, the closer people are, maybe the more irritated they are, and the more likely they are to kill themselves. So that's illusory. All right, so with your experiment this week, what we're going to try to do is look at these, something to do with these relationships. So beginning in 2010, we start to see smartphone use go up and social media go up, right? We could easily, and simultaneously we have Canadian, American, British teen rates of depression, anxiety, self-harm, and suicide also all going up. Here's the study. So we could have a correlation of this, right? Variable minutes spent on TikTok per day and how much you think of harming yourself. That would be, right, if we had a bunch of people, we could show a scatter plot in a correlation of this. But what we want to do this week is we want to be able to form an experiment. So we want to establish a cause and effect relationship. Well, what do we need to have here? We need to have an experimental group and a control group, right? So one group having something done, maybe I was joking, I was playing with this, I could have a group have 2 hours a day of social media, 4 hours a day, 8 hours a day, and another group have no hours a day. That would be the control. But how are they getting into these groups? They need to be randomly assigned, right? It can't be you pick. The interesting thing about this is if somebody was using it 8 hours a day and you move them down to 2 hours a day, maybe they're depressed because you moved them down. So there's lots of things we'd have to be careful about this. But random assignment is how they get into the groups. Random selection is how you get them in your studies. So I use this big black circle here to show all teen girls in Ohio. This is my whole population. Random selection would be, how do I get these girls from Ohio so that my results apply to everyone? And usually we just say random. Randomly select from your population so that you can generalize. That's just a fancy word for meaning apply your results to everyone. And random assignment is to put them in your groups so that there's not something different or special about how you put them in your groups. Another thing we think about with experiments here is whether we have a single blind procedure or a double blind. In a single blind, the participant doesn't know what group they are, but the researcher does. Now, this can have some problems because sometimes researchers can influence the participants, and that's when we move to a double blind, where neither the researcher nor the participant knows. And there's some stuff in this week's work to help you with this. And the last thing we kind of always need to think about with our experiments is our independent variable is our grouping variable. So it's going to be how much time you spend on social media, right? Your group, does that affect or cause a change in your dependent variable, which is what you're measuring? So I think in my example, I was measuring self-harm. All right, so on the hypothetical experiment, this is posted for this week's work. You're not going to do this experiment. You're just making a plan. Please do not conduct it. We're not allowed to. All right. You need to say who's the population you're interested in looking at. How are you going to get a sample from them? What's your research question and your hypothesis, right? So what do I want to know, does more time on TikTok lead to more self-harm? That was my example. My hypothesis is yes, more time on TikTok will lead to more self-harm. I need to say what the independent and dependent variables are. Operational definition. Ooh, this is an interesting one. We had this term, but let's review it. Operational definition is how you define it for this study so you can measure it and somebody else could measure the same thing. So I use the word self-harm. How am I defining it so it can be measured, right? I would have to say, self-harm could include cutting of wrists or legs. I'd have to say exactly what it is. Depression as measured, let's say, by the Beck's depression inventory. Exactly how I'm measuring that dependent variable. An independent variable, that would be easy in my example. It's 2 hours, 4 hours, or 6 hours on social media. Confounding variables. Confounding variables are things that get in the way. I mentioned one of those. The confounding variable would be if a student is assigned to no hours on TikTok and they were spending 6 hours a day, they might actually be more upset because they don't get to do what they wanted to do, right? That would be a confounding variable. And these things we talked about. Applicable biases would mean something like, is the researcher getting in the way, or even like on reporting of self-harm. So how do I know it's really reported? And then what conclusions can you make at the end? You don't really know, but what conclusions can be made? So that's kind of a quick overview of this week as fast as I can do it. All right, so you're going to work on this experiment. You're also going to see some very basic statistics this week, okay? There's some, and I noticed there's, these two go very fast. The hypothetical experiment and the statistical significance discussion, they're very related. So I suspect that this should take you 2 days. That's why I gave this for this video, and Monday, Tuesday for your experiment. Then you have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to really work on the resources in here. This is all the mathematics that you're going to see. So you can see here that I have quite a bit of resources for you to use. So you're going to have to spend some time on this. It all depends on how much math you have. I'm not going to have you do a whole lot of math problems, but you really need to know how to read and interpret what you're looking at. All right, so spend some time on the statistics concept map, and then you're going to take what you did for your hypothetical experiment, and I just want to see, can you tell me how statistical significance is related to what you did? And finally, there's some case studies here on ethics. Okay, so you can see that you're going to, I need to review, get rid of one resource. You don't need that module 05, but I want you to review this video, and I attached some ethical guidelines. All right, and then you have some case studies. All right, and you need to do all of them. They're not long. All right, and you can see how you're being graded on that. So that's the week. Let me know if you have any questions, and good luck.